I've always been a dreamer, but a practical dreamer. And when I was in high school, I dreamed about getting out of high school into college. And then when I wrote my first book, I dreamed about what would be the next book. And when we got into the company, so I've always been dreaming my whole life. And the ultimate dream, I think, for everybody is to be successful and to balance your work aspirations with your personal aspirations, with your family aspirations, however you define family. And so in that sense, that's been my big dream, is to just lead and live a successful life.
And you're doing that today.
I'm doing that today. I feel very fortunate, with a deep sense of gratitude, that I can actually pull this off most days.
It goes as you were hoping it would.
Most days. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Did you think you'd own your own company?
Probably. Maybe not when I was 17, but certainly after I finished my PhD. And this gets to another one of your questions about, lessons learned. And I remember I went to a headhunter, and because I wasn't really doing what I wanted to do, I was treating kids, but I wasn't a therapist. I wasn't a patient therapist. I was more of a diagnostician. And he said to me, "Why don't you do what you were trained to do, psychology, but stand up?" And it was one of the great gifts that somebody gave you, that I could stand up and talk about the principles of health and behavioral science, and that's what led me into the workplace.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So is that one of the times when you saw a fork in the road and you had to pick a path?
Yeah, well, that was definitely one of them, and it's probably the major fork, because what it did was it helped me. It took all my training and experience, but applied it in a different way, because today I work with CEOs and companies about how to build healthier companies, healthy in a very broad sense, financially, organizationally, personally, in terms of relationships and boards and the like. And so I took everything I was educated about, but brought it into the workplace.
Yeah.
Every time I reach a plateau, which we always do in our careers, I chose to invest into the future rather than maintaining the status quo. And it may be my itchiness, my desire to learn, my drive to succeed, or whatever it is. So each of those were points on the path. They were forks in the road, and I chose to invest in another book, invest in a new product, invest in expanding my business or the like. So there are multiple forks in the road.
What is the best advice you've ever been given?
I think, well, one of the things as part of my career is that I've interviewed about 500 CEOs in about 50 countries. And the CEOs of Toyota and Canon and Deutsche Bank and Boeing and Coca-Cola, the large companies. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I've learned something different from each of them. None of them have the whole profile of success, both in business or in their personal lives. But when you knit all that together, you learn so much from them. And so that's something that I've learned. The other is a story, and that is when I first got the call from the MacArthur Foundation to give us a grant to start a nonprofit on healthy organizations and healthy people. I was at a meeting with the person who headed up their adult development efforts. And he was 73 years old and an expert in adult development. And I asked him, as a 29-year-old, I said, "What can you teach me about life that you've learned in your life?" And he said, "As you go through life, the tendency is to reject the past as you embrace the future. But in reality, when you look back on life, every step forward was built on the foundation of the past experiences. And so you should really appreciate that life has a bunch of stepping stones and they build on each other." And that was an incredible piece of advice that helped me put my life in perspective.
Yeah. What do you struggle with today still, and how do you overcome it?
I think I struggle from what most everyone struggles with, and that is how to live and thrive in a world of uncertainty. Stability is an anomaly nobody's life is stable. Every time we breathe, the world changes. Our hair grows and our skin lives and dies. So we're constantly changing. So the question is, but we're not taught to live in uncertainty. We're taught to strive for stability in our lives. And it's good to have a stable home or a stable job. Don't misunderstand me. But the reality is that everything is changing. So what are the skills that you have to learn to be comfortable with uncertainty? The first is that you have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. But most people live their life trying to make it perfect. Like everything has to be just right and you're never unhappy. But the reality is that life goes like this. And that some days we're happy and some days we're less happy and some days we get our way and some days we won't. So getting comfortable being uncomfortable is really important. The second thing is to know the difference between things that you have control over and things you don't have control over. Because most people trip up when they try to control things that they have absolutely no control over. And it creates lots of angst and worry and anxiety. And so I find that those two skills are really important, but we don't teach our people, our adults or our kids, this thriving in uncertainty. And I think that's what I trip up on, and I've really tried to learn how to practice those two skills.
How do you today stay motivated? How do you write book 8 when you've already had 7 successful books?
Yeah, that's a good
Why
question.
do one more, right?
My mother.
Oh, really?
No. I would say my higher purpose. It took me 50 years to discover my higher purpose. But my higher purpose is to leave people a little bigger or a little better than I found them. And that's an interaction with a taxi driver, it's a CEO client, it's a friend of mine who is in need, it's my husband. It doesn't really matter. It's sort of leaving somebody a little better, a little bigger. So that higher purpose drives me. And it really motivates me to show up in the world and be a little bigger or better today than I was yesterday. And so I think higher purpose becomes really important. The problem is that we oftentimes don't think about our higher purpose. We think it has to be highfalutin, and it doesn't. It says, what are you here in the world to do? What is your small little contribution that you're going to make to help the world be a little better and a little bigger tomorrow than it is today?
Yeah, that's neat. Final question. If you could go back to your younger self at any age, you pick the age, and give yourself one piece of advice, what would you tell you?
I would say, don't worry as much. You know, don't live in the future obsessed with, you know, creating things that don't exist yet. It's important to have aspirations and dreams, but it's also important to live your life moment by moment, day by day. And I think we lose so much goodwill and fulfillment and happiness by trying to live, by actually living in the past and worrying about things happen, or living in the future rather than just enjoying the moment. And for me personally, it's to not worry so much about money. You know, my father was agoraphobic, and he oftentimes wouldn't go out of the house. He had trouble with his work and his job, and it built in me this need to be successful and worry about money. And the thing is, if you're doing something that you love, you'll make enough money to be successful. Or you'll change your relationship with money so money isn't so essential to being happy or successful. So just not worry as much would be my my lesson to my younger self.